Her laughter cut through the open air like something sharp. Too sharp. It wasn't the kind of laugh that carried joy. It was the kind that stopped people in their tracks and made them feel smaller without ever touching them. In the bright daylight of the auto yard, with the sun reflecting off chrome and glass, that laugh landed heavy. Final. Like a verdict already decided. The yard had been alive just seconds before. Wrenches clanking, engines humming, men talking over each other. But the sound drained out all at once, like someone pulled a plug from the world. One by one, the workers froze. A man halfway through lifting a tire held it mid-air. Another paused with his head under a hood. Even the birds seemed to quiet down. Every eye turned toward the sound. She stood there in the middle of it all, untouched by the dust and oil around her. The female CEO, tall, confident, wrapped in a white suit that looked too clean for this place. The fabric hugged her frame perfectly, like it was designed to remind everyone she didn't belong to this world of grease and grit. Her heels clicked against the concrete as she shifted her weight, each sound sharp and deliberate. Power in every step. Behind her sat the luxury car. Black paint, polished to a mirror shine, expensive enough to buy most of the homes on the block, and silent, dead. No matter how many times the key had turned, the engine refused to come alive. It was the only thing in the yard not listening to her. She crossed her arms and stared at the open hood like it had personally offended her. Her lips curled, not in frustration but in disbelief, as if the idea that something could fail her simply didn't make sense. Across from her stood the mechanic. He wasn't tall in a way that demanded attention. He didn't move fast or loud. His coveralls were worn, stained with oil that no amount of washing could ever remove. His hands were dark with grease, lines etched deep from years of work. He held a rag loosely, wiping his palms without hurry. His eyes were calm, not empty, not scared, just calm, the kind of calm that comes from knowing who you are even when the world tries to tell you who you aren't. She looked at him and laughed again, louder this time, sharp enough to sting. "Fix this engine," she said, waving a manicured hand toward the car, barely looking at him, "and I'll marry you." The words hung in the air. For a second, no one moved. No one breathed. It felt like the sun itself paused overhead, watching to see what would happen next. A few workers looked down at the concrete, suddenly very interested in cracks and oil stains. Others stared straight at the mechanic, waiting, wondering, hoping, fearing. Because everyone understood what that sentence really was. It wasn't humor, it wasn't flirtation, it was power on display. A reminder. She wasn't offering anything. She was taking something. Dignity, respect, humanity, wrapping it all up in a joke she could walk away from without consequence. This wasn't just a joke. It was humiliation wrapped in daylight, loud enough for everyone to hear. The mechanic didn't react the way some expected. He didn't snap back, didn't laugh along, didn't bow his head either. He stood there, steady. He wiped his hands slowly on the rag, folding it once, then again, like he was buying time, not to think of an answer, but to decide if she was worth one. He looked at the engine first, took it in the way a doctor studies a patient. The angle of the hoses, the way the metal sat, the silence coming from inside it. Then he lifted his gaze to her face, not with anger, with something quieter, something deeper. It unsettled her. She shifted again, her heel scraping slightly against the ground. She hadn't expected silence. Silence made room for thought, and she didn't like that. "What?" she said, tilting her head. "You can't do it." A few workers flinched. They'd seen this before. People like her always pushed a little harder when they didn't get the reaction they wanted. They mistook restraint for weakness, stillness for fear. The mechanic said nothing. His silence stretched, long enough to make her uncomfortable, long enough for the air to thicken, long enough for everyone to feel the tension pressing against their chests. She scoffed. "Figures!" She turned slightly, already dismissing him, already rewriting the story in her head. Another failed attempt, another reason to believe what she already believed, that men like him were good with their hands but not their minds, that they worked here because they belonged here. What she didn't know was that silence had nothing to do with fear. It was discipline. He had learned a long time ago that not every insult deserved a reply. Some deserved patience, some deserved time, and some deserved to be answered not with words but with truth. He stepped closer to the car. The sun reflected off the hood, throwing light across his face. He leaned in, listening. Not just looking, listening. He placed a hand on the metal, feeling for something most people missed. A vibration, a tension, a story beneath the surface. She watched him now, arms still crossed, chin lifted. To her, this was entertainment, a final attempt before she ordered the car towed somewhere else. Somewhere more expensive, somewhere more qualified. Around them, the yard slowly came back to life, but quieter now. Conversations turned into whispers. Tools moved more slowly. Everyone felt it. Something was happening, not loud, not dramatic, but real. The mechanic's face didn't change. His brow didn't furrow in confusion. His hands didn't fumble. They moved with purpose. He adjusted a valve, checked a line, tapped lightly like he was knocking on a door. She laughed under her breath. "Take all the time you need," she said, sarcasm dripping from every word. "I've got meetings all day." He still didn't answer. She mistook his focus for submission, his calm for surrender. She didn't know she had just challenged the one man in the yard who understood engines the way surgeons understand hearts, not by memorizing manuals but by living with machines, by listening when others rushed, by learning when others assumed. The sun burned overhead, bright and unforgiving. There was no shade where they stood, no place to hide. Everything was visible, every stare, every breath, every choice. And in that moment, something shifted, not loudly, not yet. But the ground beneath them felt different, like the start of something that couldn't be undone. The mechanic straightened slightly, still facing the engine. He took a slow breath, the kind that settles the body, the kind that prepares you for what comes next. Behind him, the CEO checked her watch, already bored, already certain of the ending. She had no idea. The moment stretched, tightening into something solid, something permanent, a crossroads disguised as a joke, a challenge disguised as laughter. Destiny doesn't always arrive with thunder. Sometimes it shows up in broad daylight, wearing a smile that cuts, daring you to respond. And the yard waited. So did the engine. So did the man who refused to be broken by a laugh that was never meant to be funny. The story had just begun. The yard didn't return to normal after her laugh. It couldn't. Something had been cracked open and everyone felt it. Word moved faster than sound. One look turned into another. A whisper slid across the concrete like spilled oil. Men leaned closer to each other without meaning to. Phones that had been out for music or messages slipped quietly back into pockets. No one wanted proof they'd witnessed this. Pride and pity mixed in the air, thick and uncomfortable, and nobody knew which feeling sat heavier in their chest. She noticed the attention and liked it. Power always enjoyed an audience. The CEO straightened her back, lifted her chin, and spoke louder than necessary, making sure every syllable traveled. "You mechanics are all the same," she said, her voice smooth and sharp at once. "Big confidence, small results." A few workers flinched. One shook his head slowly. Another clenched his jaw so tight the muscle jumped. They'd heard insults before, but this one felt different. This one wasn't frustration. It was judgment, a final statement, a belief she carried comfortably. The mechanic didn't look up. He lowered himself beside the engine, knees touching the ground, like he was kneeling at an altar only he understood. There was no rush in his movement, no show, no need to prove anything to anyone watching. He adjusted his rag, set it aside, and leaned in close, eyes scanning, ears open. Precision. That's what it was. Calm, practiced precision. She rolled her eyes. "Take your time," she said, glancing at her watch. "I've got meetings to attend." The words were meant to cut, to rush him, to remind him that her time mattered and his didn't, that she was choosing to stand here when she could be somewhere better. He didn't respond. Seconds passed, then a minute. The sun climbed higher, bright and unforgiving. Sweat formed along foreheads. The yard felt quieter now, but not peaceful. The silence buzzed, alive with expectation. She shifted her weight again, heels scraping concrete. "This is ridiculous," she muttered. Not really to anyone, but loud enough to be heard. "Did they even train you people properly?" That one landed harder. The mechanic's hands moved inside the engine bay, careful and steady. He traced a line, adjusted a fitting, paused, listened. He closed his eyes for a second, like he was blocking out the world to hear something deeper. The engine didn't speak in words, it never did. But to him, it told stories, of stress, of imbalance, of something not quite where it should be. She laughed under her breath, then louder. "Let me guess," she said, pacing slowly behind him. "Self-taught, right? Learned everything right here. No degree, no real schooling, Just grease and guesswork. Each sentence landed like a hammer. Some of the workers looked away. Others watched her, waiting to see how far she would go. It was painful, the way she spoke about him like he wasn't there. Like he was an object. Like he couldn't hear every word. He said nothing. That silence frustrated her more than anger ever could. She stopped pacing and leaned forward slightly, trying to catch his eye. "Do you even understand what kind of engine this is?" she asked. "Or are you just pretending?" Still nothing. Inside the engine, something clicked, a faint sound, barely noticeable, but his hand paused at exactly the right moment. His fingers stilled, his head tilted. Outside, something shifted too. The workers noticed it before she did. They noticed his hands, how steady they were, no shaking, no doubt. They noticed how he wasn't forcing anything. He wasn't yanking or slamming or guessing. He was listening. Like the engine was a living thing and he was learning its breathing pattern. One of the younger mechanics whispered, "He sees it." Another nodded slowly. "Yeah, he always does." She didn't hear them. Or maybe she did and chose not to. She was already smiling, already confident. In her mind, the ending was written. He would fail, she would leave, and this moment would become just another story she told about incompetence. "This is why people like you stay here," she said casually, almost bored. "Right where you belong." The air went still again. That sentence didn't echo. It sank, heavy, thick. It settled on shoulders, pressed into chests. It carried history in it. Years of being overlooked, of being underestimated, of being told you're only as good as the dirt beneath your feet. The mechanic froze, not in fear, in control. Slowly he straightened his back. He rose to his feet without turning around right away, like he wanted to finish something inside himself before facing her. When he did turn, his expression was calm, but different now. Focused. Certain. "Give me 10 more minutes," he said quietly. His voice wasn't loud. It didn't challenge her. It didn't beg either. It was a statement. Simple, clean, honest. She blinked, surprised. Then she laughed again. This time it wasn't sharp. It was amused. "Make it 5, she said, waving her hand dismissively. "I don't have all day." 5 minutes. The workers exchanged looks. 5 minutes wasn't enough. Not for what this engine needed, not for what this moment demanded. It felt intentional, like she wanted to set him up to fail. He nodded once. No argument, no complaint. He bent back down, hands moving faster now but not rushed. Purposeful. He adjusted a component no one else would have touched. Checked something hidden deep, something most manuals never mentioned. The engine responded with a soft sound like it had been waiting. She stepped back, folding her arms again, confident. She pulled out her phone, already half-checked out of the moment. To her, this was done. But the yard leaned in. 5 minutes ticked by slower than time ever had before. Every second stretched, heavy with possibility. The sun burned bright overhead, illuminating everything. There was no shadow to hide in, no excuse waiting. The engine waited, so did fate. And somewhere between her laughter and his silence, the balance of power began to shift, quietly, invisibly, toward a truth that couldn't be laughed away. The key turned. For half a second, nothing happened. That pause stretched so tight it hurt. Then the engine came alive, not with a cough, not with a struggle. It roared to life smooth and strong like it had been waiting for permission to breathe. The sound rolled across the yard, deep and steady, filling every corner. It wasn't loud in a chaotic way. It was confident, clean, perfect. Silence crashed down right after. It wasn't empty silence. It was stunned silence. The kind that hits when reality moves faster than belief. The workers froze where they stood, eyes wide, mouths slightly open. One man slowly lowered the wrench he'd been holding midair. Another took a step back without realizing he'd moved. Even the air felt different, like it had shifted direction. The CEO didn't move at all. Her smile vanished as if it had never been there. The smug curve of her lips flattened, then tightened. Her eyes flicked from the hood to the mechanic and back again, like she was trying to figure out which one was lying to her. Her phone slipped from her hand and hit the concrete with a sharp crack. She didn't notice. She couldn't hear anything but that engine running smooth behind her disbelief. For the first time since she arrived, she looked small. The mechanic stood up slowly and closed the hood with care, like you would tuck a blanket over something that mattered. He wiped his hands on the rag again, calm as ever, and stepped back. He didn't smile. He didn't celebrate. He just stood there, letting the truth speak for itself. Someone exhaled loudly. Another whispered, "Damn." The yard came back to life in tiny movements, but no one spoke too loudly. No one wanted to break the moment. The CEO finally found her voice, but it didn't come out the way she expected. That's impossible," she said, shaking her head. "This car was checked. Twice." He nodded once, like he understood exactly why she was confused. "It was," he said. His voice was steady, low. "But they were looking in the wrong place." She stared at him now, really stared. Not like before, not like he was a problem or a joke. Like she was seeing him for the first time. "Then what was it?" she asked, defensive but unsure. He gestured toward the engine. "A rare misalignment," he said. "Happens when the tolerance is off by just enough that it doesn't show up in standard checks. The manufacturer missed it. It's not common, but I've seen it before." Her brow furrowed. "Seen it where?" He paused for a beat, just long enough to let the weight of the moment settle. "Years ago," he said. "Overseas." The word hung there. The workers leaned in without realizing it. Even she took a step closer, drawn by something she didn't understand yet. "I worked on engines like this before they ever hit the market," he continued. "Helped design them, test them, fix the problems before anyone else ever saw them." Her eyes widened. "You?" she said, the words slipping out before she could stop it. He nodded. "No pride, no bitterness, just fact. I was part of a team. Good one. We solved problems like this every day." She shook her head slowly. "Then why are you here?" she asked, gesturing around the yard. "Why are you fixing cars?" There it was. The question she'd been circling since the beginning. The question loaded with assumptions. He met her gaze fully now. His eyes didn't accuse. They didn't plead. They just held truth. "Because when I came back," he said, "the rooms I used to work in suddenly had no space for me." The words were simple. They didn't need to be dressed up. Everyone understood what he meant. "Corporate offices," he went on, "boardrooms, places with glass walls and polished floors. I walked in with experience, with results. But all they saw was someone who didn't fit their picture." No one interrupted him, not even her. "So I took my knowledge where it was needed," he said. "Engines don't care who fixes them. They just need someone who listens." Her mouth opened, then closed. She swallowed. This wasn't the story she had prepared for. This wasn't luck. This wasn't a fluke. This was mastery shaped by loss and patience and resilience. She looked around the yard, really looked, at the men she'd dismissed, at the place she'd insulted, at the engine humming steadily behind her, and for the first time something uncomfortable crept in, awareness. Who are you?" she asked, her voice softer now, unsteady. He didn't hesitate. "Someone you laughed at." The words landed quietly. No anger, no drama, just truth. The workers straightened almost at once, like they'd been given permission to stand taller. One man crossed his arms with pride. Another nodded slowly, eyes shining. The balance in the yard shifted. It wasn't loud, but it was complete. She felt it, the way the attention had moved, the way the power she thought she held was slipping through her fingers. She had walked in believing she owned this moment. Now she realized she was standing inside something she didn't control. Her face flushed, not from heat but from realization. She hadn't just mocked a mechanic. She had belittled brilliance. She had laughed at someone who carried knowledge she couldn't buy. Someone who had been pushed down not because he lacked skill, but because he didn't fit into spaces designed to exclude him. The sunlight felt harsher now, not because it was brighter, but because it exposed everything. There was nowhere to hide from the truth standing right in front of her. "I didn't know," she said finally. It wasn't an excuse, just a statement. He nodded again. "Most people don't." He said. She glanced down at her phone on the ground, then back up at him. Her confidence had drained away, replaced by something raw, something human. "You could have said something," she said weakly. He shook his head. "You weren't listening," he replied. That stung more than any insult ever could. The engine continued to run, smooth and flawless, like a heartbeat reminding everyone what competence sounded like. The yard felt different now, quieter but stronger, like a truth had settled into the concrete itself. She took a breath, a real one, the kind you take when you realize you've been wrong in a way you can't undo. Her shoulders dropped slightly, the tension easing out of her posture. "I owe you an apology," she said. He looked at her, considering. Not to punish her, to understand if the words meant anything. Around them, the workers waited, not for revenge, not for praise, for dignity. The moment hung there, unresolved. The engine ran. The sun blazed overhead, and everyone felt it. This wasn't the end of the story. It was the turning point. Because sometimes the loudest lesson doesn't come from a shout or a laugh. Sometimes it comes from an engine speaking truth in a yard where silence once meant weakness. And now, with her world cracked open and his truth standing tall, the question wasn't whether the engine worked. It was what she would do with the truth it had revealed. She stood there for a long moment after the engine spoke its truth. Her shoulders tight, her breath shallow, her eyes no longer searching for control but for understanding. The yard waited with her. No one rushed her, no one pushed. The silence this time wasn't heavy with fear or humiliation, it was heavy with reckoning. When she finally spoke, her voice was different, quieter, stripped of sharp edges. "I'm sorry," she said, not loud enough to make a show of it, not polished enough to sound rehearsed, just honest enough to hurt. The words didn't rush out. They fell one by one, like something fragile she was afraid to drop. "I was wrong, about you, about this place, about more than I want to admit." She didn't look away when she said it. That mattered. The mechanic listened without interrupting. His face didn't change much, but something in his posture softened just slightly. He had waited a long time in his life for apologies that never came. He knew better than to demand perfection from one that finally did. He reached out and handed her the keys. That was it. No speech, no reminder of how she'd laughed, no quiet revenge, just the keys resting in his grease-stained palm, offered back like the moment itself was complete. "I don't want marriage," he said calmly. "I want respect." The words landed harder than any insult she had thrown earlier. They cut through every assumption she'd made, every careless joke, every belief she'd worn without question. Respect wasn't something she could joke about. It wasn't something she could buy. It was something she had failed to give. She nodded slowly, swallowing. "You're right," she said. "And I didn't give you that." The workers watched closely now. This wasn't just about the two of them anymore. This was about what happened next. About whether power could learn. About whether humility could exist where arrogance once stood. She took a breath, then another. "I'd like to offer you a position," she said. "Not here, not just this. With us. With the company." She hesitated, choosing her words carefully. A partnership, a real one, a seat at the table. That table. The one she had guarded. The one built with glass and steel and unspoken rules about who belonged and who didn't. The table he had been pushed away from years ago, no matter how much he knew or how much he gave. The yard felt impossibly still. He didn't answer right away. This time it wasn't silence as defense. It was silence as choice. He looked around the yard, at the men who worked beside him every day, at the concrete stained with years of effort, at the tools that had fed his family when doors closed elsewhere. This place had been both a refuge and a reminder. It had held him when the world refused to see him. It had also limited him when others decided what he was worth. He looked back at her. This time, he said slowly, "I choose. Not yes, not no, just that. Because the power to choose was the real shift. Not the offer, not the apology, the choice." She nodded, accepting it, truly accepting it. No pressure, no timeline, no expectation that gratitude was owed. "Whenever you're ready," she said. A murmur rolled through the yard, soft but electric. Something like relief, something like pride. Shoulders straightened, backs lifted, eyes met where they once dropped. The yard buzzed again, but not with laughter, with pride. The engine idled behind them, steady and strong, like a heartbeat returning to a body that had been starved of oxygen. Sunlight spilled across the concrete, bright and honest. There was no shadow where this truth hid. In daylight, everyone could see it clearly now. Power doesn't come from titles. Worth doesn't wear suits. And dignity doesn't need permission. She stayed longer than she planned to, longer than any meeting on her calendar. She asked questions, real ones. She listened. Not just to him, but to the others. She heard stories she'd never allowed space for before. Each one reshaped her understanding of what leadership actually meant. The mechanic returned to work eventually, sleeves rolled, hands steady, the same as always. But something had changed, not just for him, for everyone watching. They had seen respect given where mockery once lived. They had seen silence transform into authority. They had seen a man stand without raising his voice and still change the direction of a room. As the day wore on and the sun dipped lower, the yard slowly returned to its rhythm. Tools clanked again. Engines hummed, conversations rose, but the feeling lingered. A quiet awareness. A lesson etched into memory. Never mistake silence for weakness. Never judge skill by status. And never laugh at someone who's quietly mastering what you barely understand. Because sometimes, the man you mock today is the one who rewrites your tomorrow. And sometimes, the lesson you learn in daylight follows you for the rest of your life, long after the engine stops running.